I think it always begins with stereotypes about the 16 types. And that's because why would you study the system if you weren't trying to figure out your type and what it means to be fill in the blank?
Well, and by the way, just to make a comment, that's after things like introvert, extrovert in a general way, public consciousness way, or type A versus type B personality, or, he's a go-getter, or any of those kinds of like real broad brush patterns. When you're talking about the actual Myers-Briggs system, this is where we start.
Exactly. Yeah. A person can have lots of entry points to type as a concept. But Myers-Briggs specifically, the only one of the 4 dichotomies that's in the collective unconscious is introversion and extroversion. And so a person might think they know what that means and how they relate to it, but it's not, all the other dichotomies are things that people, like, you really have to explain what they mean. Thinker, feeler, kind of, but not as a separation inside of a person, not as a preference. So it always begins with, okay, so what's my type? And so while it's built on the building blocks of those dichotomies, and usually a person will take online assessments, or they might even take the official MBTI, or they might watch a lot of videos, read a lot of descriptions or whatever, the first place is figuring out your type usually. And if a person can't, sometimes they'll continue down this rabbit's hole longer to be able to identify their type. And in some ways, that's a tougher path, because the more information you get, sometimes it's harder. Like, understanding type after you figured out your own personality type is much easier because you use yourself as a control. So that's a tougher path to go down.
Yeah.
But it's usually, there's almost like a stuckness until you figure out your best fit type. And so that's the beginning. And when you figure out your best fit type, you're trying to match it up with these online descriptions, which are usually built to some extent on stereotypes. And so you sign up for, or one can sign up for like an ENTP Instagram, handle, and they give you all the ENTP memes every day or whatever your type is. And so these stereotypes are the first barrier of entry. They're the beginning. And if a person is satisfied with that, they'll stop. And they think it's really interesting. And stopping here, by the way, this is why people go, it's just like horoscopes, right? Type is like horoscopes. Well, they never got beyond the stereotypes. They never got beyond the meme level. And to some extent, they are kind of like horoscopes.
Yeah.
It's like you see what you see because you identify with it. It resonates a little bit with you. I have to admit, I'm not into astrology or into horoscopes or anything, but I'm a Libra, apparently. And every time I read Libra stuff, I'm like, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
Right? So there is there's a limitation to self-understanding that you're going to get when you're at that point. But I think staying there for a while and familiarizing yourself with the concept of this, like sort of the stereotype of your type, I think is... Yeah. It provides a good foundation for where you're going next.
Also, I think as we go down this road, we start to shift each level we go, we start to shift from description to prescription. And here, while some people will give prescription at this meme level, most of it's just describing what's going on or talking about characteristics or traits, surface level behaviors, these kinds of things, things that sometimes are common to all humans. So sometimes like, everybody does that. Come on. And if somebody is giving prescription at this level, that's really irresponsible because it's not nuanced, it's not deep, it's very surface, and it could be actually harmful to people as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, or it needs to be real vague.
Advice is what I'm talking about. Prescription meaning advice.
Yeah, I mean, you can give advice at this level, but it needs to be vague enough for a person to be able to personalize it to their life. If you're giving very specific types of advice, you're going to get a lot of pushback because people are going to go, well, that's not like me, right? Because how can you give...
I would hope they would say that. Well, the worst thing is ENTP should never date an ENFJ. And like, okay, well, I'll never date an ENFJ. Like, that's life-changing decisions. You might cut out somebody that would be a wonderful match for you, assuming you even have their type right or your type right based on this thing that you've read on this meme. So that's why I think it's so irresponsible to give advice like that at this level.
Yeah. What did somebody say? We can't be an ENTP and an ENFP couple because we can't build intimacy.
Yeah.
I was like, Well,
what
we
are
are
you
still
talking about?
humans, right?
I don't
We
know.
have the human ability to create intimacy. So
I didn't understand the comment, but yeah,
Yeah.
I remember what that comment came through.
yeah. So when you're at that level, there's definitely, I mean, there's a lot of diminishing returns on the kinds of application or things you can understand there. So I think what oftentimes happens is that, especially, in terms of stereotypes, the person starts to realize that there's like a dichotomy level of understanding and awareness. Like, oh, I'm not just an ENTP, I'm a thinker and a thinker woman. That's relevant. So being a thinker is a thing too. Or I'm not just an ENTP, I'm a perceiver. That means I go about the world a little differently than the way that it's set up, because it feels like it's kind of set up in a judger way. So that's relevant. Or I'm an intuitive or whatever, right? So when we get to that level, now we're talking about not just our type and the stereotype. Now we're talking about the parts of it and some of the wisdom that can come from understanding how you're different from others. Being a thinker and a woman, now a bunch of ahas hit me. And now I can understand why I might have some challenges with other people. It's not just our types, but it's like the component parts. And so that's when we realize that there might be something deeper to this. There might be something prescriptive, right? Or even with better descriptions than just, Doc Brown.
Well, I think it's categorical. It creates a binary. I'm either a thinker or a feeler. And we get real rigid on the I'm either this or that. Like it draws a line in the sand. And so that's really useful to compare and contrast. Say, you're this, I'm this. Oh, I see the differences.
Right.
And I think stereotypes and memes don't really give us that as much unless we really know, because we don't know much when we're only at that level. But here we're starting to know, okay, you're a feeler, you're a thinker, I'm a feeler. I understand what that means. I'm going to process things this way. You're going to process things that way.
Yeah.
So that dichotomous binary is very useful at this level.
Yes. So I think, and people can stay there for a super long time. In fact, I think that's generally where people stayed for decades and decades and decades.